Kia ora koutou katoa. Snakes, particularly for those unfamiliar with them, epitomize fear. There's a Janet Frame short story called You Are Now Entering the Human Heart, about an English teacher who took her class to the Discovery Centre in the City Museum. There, a gentleman told the children how harmless snakes were and how they were misunderstood. The gentleman, with a python as a scarf, invited the teacher forward to demonstrate his point. The teacher had had a bad week. One of those weeks when she wondered why she kept doing what she was doing. There is little appeal about 30 cranky and tiresome children when one likewise is cranky and tired. Now her bad week just got worse. She was being asked to demonstrate the benign nature of snakes when her personal feelings were far from benign. Should she just confess her fear up front and lose considerable face, or suppress her fear and tough it out? She went for the latter. All went well until the snake moved. Christianity as a religion has had a long and ambivalent relationship with fear. On the one hand, it has tried to free us from fear. Yet on the other hand, it has also told us to fear hell, sex, difference, disapproval, and of course, fear God. Instead of releasing us from our fears, religion has often heightened them. In John 3:14 and 15, there is mention of a snake. It reads, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so the chosen one, that's Jesus, must be lifted up. Yes, Jesus has been likened to a snake, so that everyone who believes in the chosen one might have eternal life. Now the background for this text is Numbers 21. The story goes that the wandering Israelites were in the desert, hungry and thirsty and grumbling. And their God, who didn't like grumbling, sent along some poisonous snakes to bite them and kill them. You might think like me that God doesn't send snakes to bite and kill people. But let's just ignore that theological difficulty for now. The Israelites, faced with snakes and death, said sorry to Moses for grumbling. And Moses passed on their sorry to God. There's also a theological difficulty there too, but ignore that. Then comes what I think is the interesting bit. God tells Moses to craft a bronze serpent, a sculpture, put it on a pole and raise it up in the air, so all who look upon it would live. The people stared at what they feared and were healed. Making an image of a snake to cure snake bite is called by anthropologists sympathetic magic. The image of the creature is said to offset the creature's power. It's also recorded in 1 Samuel 6 that it was done with mice, offsetting a plague of mice with images of mice. Probably why people have gnomes in their garden. Just saying. Nowadays, we could understand sympathetic magic as similar to what immunologists do when making hyperimmune serum. A little of the disease is administered to a healthy person in order that their body develops its own immunity. In ancient times, there was a close relation between sympathetic magic and the idea of scapegoating. Leviticus 16. Scapegoating is the belief that somehow an animal can carry the blame of a community and thereby bring healing for that community. There is a significant ethical problem with this. Ask the goat. Isaiah 53 talks about human suffering servant carrying that blame. A human suffering servant carrying that blame. And the early Jesus movement, when struggling with the fact that their Messiah, the big conquering Messiah, Jesus, had been executed by the Romans for being a criminal, drew upon this idea of a scapegoat. One must take the sins of the many, as one way of interpreting his death. Back to the pole and Moses. Well, you might be surprised to learn, though not too surprised if you've been around churches, the crafted bronze serpent that had been affixed to a pole was not left in the desert. No, it continued the journey into what was to be called the Promised Land, also known as Canaan to the Canaanites who just happened to be there. The snake on the pole, well, it outlasted Moses and the judges and David and Solomon. And after the division of Israel into Israel and Judah, following Solomon's death, it remained in Judah, in Jerusalem, in the temple no less. And by Hezekiah's time at least, it was an object of worship, regardless of whether you've been bitten by a snake or not. There are, of course, problems with 2 Kings 18, 1-5. Hezekiah is praised as an all-round good guy, king extraordinaire, for smashing indigenous matriarchal religion, Asherah being a female Canaanite deity, as colonizing patriarchal religion often does. But let's park the ethics of that too. The progressive Unitarian preacher Carl Gregg, in interpreting this passage, writes, "The bronze serpent had been built to remind the Israelites to look to God for healing and stop complaining about minor inconveniences like food quality, and to be grateful for major events like freedom from oppression." But by Hezekiah's day, the same bronze serpent had become an end in itself. Judeans were worshipping the snake instead of God, to whom the statue pointed. Greg goes on. The writer of the Gospel of John finds healing from fear in Jesus being lifted up on the cross, just as the Israelites found healing in Moses lifting up the serpent in the wilderness. But in 2 Kings 18, we see how the symbol of the serpent has hardened. It no longer points beyond itself to God. Instead, it has become a simplistic formula. If you want to be healed, go visit the bronze snake. But God can't be reduced to a formula. Which begs the question about idols we, the church, have made out of doctrines and other symbols. For God, rightly as Greg says, is not a formula or a fixed point, or can be captured in a creed that is authoritative forever and ever. Creeds are kind of best guesses at the time and the culture they're written. No, the essence of God is relationship. Everything about God is relational. And we use words like mutuality, unconditionality, and love to point to and glimpse some understanding of the relation in which we live and move and have our being. The relation, the mutual relation that is God. And I wonder too if, following the Reverend Dr. Gregg and His Majesty Hezekiah, the cross itself and the accompanying doctrines of atonement have become Christianity's bronze serpent on a pole. I find it intriguing that the author of the fourth gospel likens Jesus to a snake. The snake has a long history. It slithers into Egypt, Africa, India, Japan, Mesopotamia, Canaan, and Greece. It is an ambiguous symbol. On the one hand, it's dangerous, it kills. and it is to be feared. On the other, like in the Moses story, it is about healing and protection. Aesculapius, the Greek god of medicine, had his staff entwined with a serpent, the spirit of life. It's a strange symbol, a symbol of both life and death, not unlike a crucified Saviour. A serpent, of course, pops up in the Genesis creation myth as a literary device to critique the deity and encourage Adam and Eve likewise. And not surprisingly, I suppose, it's the snake and the woman who are forever after blamed for the disruption and disintegration of this so-called paradise. I would suggest that the serpent in this myth can be understood as a disturber and disruptor, but also the one who helped Adam and Eve into their adulthood, leaving home where everything had been provided, to find their own way in the world. Maybe we can understand Jesus too as one helping us into our adulthood, of not being controlled by our fears of disapproval, but acting, taking responsibility to create a new community of belonging. There's a well-known Christian hymn, Lift High the Cross. The original lyrics, which are a little cringeworthy, are all about the victory that Christ has won. What is less well known is the lifting is a reference to Jesus being like Moses' snake, something vilified but which brings healing. Like with the scapegoat metaphor, I suspect the early Jesus communities, in struggling to understand both Jesus' life and the power of that death in their lives, read this story of Moses and the snakes and recognize Jesus as the one blamed and feared by the people, yet also the one, when the people looked at him, who would bring new life. Most of us struggle to understand how Jesus could be feared. Wasn't he loving, kind, non-violent, great neighbor, nice guy? Yet Jesus was also a disturber of the peace. And peace, even the oppressive Pax Romana, peace through violence, as Don Crossan calls it, had a comforting predictability about it. The Roman regime offered stability, good for the share market and all that. Markets don't like disruptions and disruptors. I'm reminded of James K. Baxter's parabolic story of a man in an iron tank. This man was comfortably cocooned away and had to endure and feared each day a man outside with a shotgun who would blast holes in the tank, not killing the man inside. Eventually the holes rusted and the walls of the whole tank fell down. And one fateful, fear-filled day, the man inside stepped out to meet his adversary, who then laid down his weapon and held out his hands. And this adversary was Jesus. Psychotherapists might offer a similar lens to Baxter in trying to understand why Jesus was a threat. He invited his followers to face their fears, to come to terms with their fears. He invited them to take risks, like leaving livelihoods behind. He invited his followers to face, live, and wrestle with fears, and not be constrained by them. Struggle, doubt, and loss are part of faith. Fear is not to be feared, but needs to be faced with courage. And Jesus wasn't offering surety to his followers. He wasn't doing conventional religion. He wasn't doing conventional anything. Like we might imagine with the parable when the man walked out of the tank and met Jesus. Jesus was a disruptor, sure, but Jesus wasn't going to be his provider from then on. Personally, I prefer Mary Oliver to James K. Baxter. And her poem, Wild Geese, is saying something similar. Mary writes, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the rivers, the mountains. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things." The iron tank in this wild geese poem is the scripting we often imbued from childhood. To be good, be a good kid. To conform, and to feel guilt. And freedom from this tank is, in Mary Oliver's words, about trusting yourself, your body and instincts. To trust that you belong, despite feelings of despair and loss. Freedom and healing, writes Mary, are woven into nature itself, offering comfort and wonder. And nature calls to you. The wild geese call to you. Nature offers itself to you. And we need to have the faith, the courage to respond. Blessings to you this week.